What's up, everybody? So today's going to be a little bit of a different one. I'm going to be arguing that this one guy called Eutyches actually held to Sola Scriptura. So Eutyches is a heretic, number one. He this image is bad, but they always draw heretics like this, man. They draw them like flipping bums, man. All right. He was a controversial guy at the Council of Chalcedon. So he was alive at Chalcedon. But he denied, the specific sentence that he denied was the fact that Christ is consubstantial with us. So Chalcedonians and non-Chalcedonians, everybody believes that Christ is consubstantial with the Father. That means he shares the same essence with the Father, but he's also consubstantial with us. He shares the same essence with us. But Eutyches denied he was consubstantial with us. And that was because he held to one nature of Christ, and he confused the natural properties into basically only divine properties. So if he's now denying that Christ is consubstantial with us, he's now confusing the natural properties of Christ. Since Christ has two sets of properties, some people say two natures. The Orientals just say two sets of properties because they want to keep one nature. But now Eutyches, by saying Christ is not consubstantial, now destroys the human set of properties because he shares those with us. And now if you're saying he doesn't share those with us, what's going on with them? And he basically was considered a monophysite, which it's like the exact same thing. It still means one, but it's a label for people like Eutyches who confuse the humanity, basically absorbing the humanity in the divinity. So in his eyes, there was one nature, and it was like kind of divine, just like taking over the humanity, and he was just confusing the properties. So he was a heretic. He was condemned by both sides, to be honest. And nobody holds this position, but that's just a little backstory, because the real thing I'm going to be arguing is that he believed in Sola Scriptura. So what is Sola Scriptura? So there's a lot of different versions of Sola Scriptura, but in essence it means Scripture alone, and namely the Protestant kind of Reformed view or Reformation view is that the Bible is the only infallible rule of faith or only infallible authority, and other writings or traditions are acceptable, but only if Scripture accepts them. So you would hear like Sola Scriptura among like Pentecostals or something. They just reject. Depends on the Pentecostal, but they just reject all tradition and just say Bible only. But that's not the traditional Protestant view. Traditional Protestant view, they accept tradition as insofar as Scripture accepts them. So here's some confessions, just to not say that I'm capping. So this is a Reformed confession. We do not despise the interpretation of the Greek and Latin fathers and the teachings of council, but subordinate them to Scriptures, honoring them as far as they agree with the Scriptures, and modestly dissenting from them when they go beyond or against the Scriptures. In matters of faith, we cannot admit any other judge than God himself, who through his word tells us what is true and what is false, what is to be followed and what is to be avoided. So this is literally what am I doing? This through his word. This doesn't mean Jesus. This doesn't actually mean the second hypostasis of the Trinity. It means Scripture, because it's paraphrasing from the Westminster Confession. But yeah, you pay attention. This is very important. Honoring them, we honor the fathers in their interpretation as far as they agree with Scripture. But if they go beyond Scripture, we reject them. Okay, that's very important. Now Anglicans, so that's Presbyterians, they have to hold to these confessions. This is Anglicans, the 39 Articles, which is basically like their main thing. The Holy Scriptures contain all things necessary to your salvation, so that whatsoever is not read therein, so whatever is not in them, nor may be proved thereby, is not to be required of any man, that it should be believed as an article of faith, or thought requisite or necessary to salvation. So if it's not in Scripture, or nor may be proved thereby, or not proved, it is not to be believed as an article of faith. Yeah. So basically, if it's not in Scripture, not article of faith. Another one, Article 8 from the same Anglican 39 Articles. The three creeds, Nicene Creed, Athanasius Creed, and that which is commonly called the Apostles' Creed, ought to be thoroughly to be received and believed, because they may be proved by most certain warrants of Holy Scripture. So the only reason you agree with the Nicene Creed is because they agree with Scripture. They have nothing in and of themselves. They call this infallible per accidens. Like, I don't really think that makes any sense, but infallible per accidens, because it's quoting infallible things, or it's like saying something infallible, not because it's infallible, but because the thing that it's saying is infallible. All right, let's go. Now we're getting into Eutyches and why I think he holds the exact same view as these guys in the Reformation. So, Eutyches, he said, in the Scriptures I find nothing of two natures. Yeah. Okay. He also said, he would now indeed, since the synod so required, accept the manner of speech in question, that Christ was of one substance with us and of two natures. But he found it neither in Holy Scripture nor in the Fathers collectively, and therein could not pronounce an anathema on the non-acceptance of that expression, because in that case he would be anathemizing his fathers. So Eutyches said, he said, I don't see in Scripture that it says two natures. I don't see in the Fathers that it says two natures. So two natures is bad. So if I anathematize, Eutyches is thinking like this: if I anathematize the saying that Christ is only one nature after the incarnation, then I'm anathemizing Scripture and the Fathers. Okay, that's his idea. And now let's look at his view on the Fathers, because Sola Scriptura is very important to decipher the relation between tradition and Scripture, and tradition includes the Fathers as well. So when Eutyches replied, I read the writings, or read, I don't know, of Saint Cyril and Saint Athanasius. Before the union they speak of two natures, but after they speak of one. So here Eutyches is literally explicitly appealing to church fathers, Cyril and Athanasius. He's saying, look, they speak of it. Eutyches in the relationship between Scripture and Fathers and Scripture. And now, this is the most important part. Eutyches says, or rather the representatives of Eutyches record Eutyches saying, if the Fathers of the Church erred in some expression, I do not blame them for this, but I only inquire in Holy Scripture. So he said, if they erred, we go full screen. If they erred, he doesn't blame them. He is going to inquire in Scripture. Now, let's go to the second quote. That the Fathers have spoken diversely, and I accept all from them, but not as a rule of faith. Okay. He just said he doesn't accept the Fathers as a rule of faith, which was received with a lot of disagreement. But let's go. In this new testimony, he added and said, Eutyches then had also said, I follow the explanation of the Fathers, and the agents of Eutyches laid great stress upon this. So immediately after the representatives, so in this synod of home synod of Constantinople, it was basically after Ephesus 2, but before Chalcedon. And so it was a little stalemate where guys started to really understand like damn, now the natures of Christ are coming into question. Is he one after the union? Is he two after the union? And Eutyches basically had representatives there. And the representatives said these two quotes, and then after they felt the need to lay great stress upon the fact that he follows the explanation of the Fathers, because as I'm gonna prove, this wasn't met with great reception, not as a rule of faith, and they felt the need to follow up and say, no, he does follow the explanation, he does. And then he also had to follow up and say he thought exactly as the synods of Nicaea and Ephesus had taught. And then he also says later on, woe is me if I should anathematize the Holy Fathers. So he is now laying great stress on the fact that he follows the explanation of the Fathers. He believes exactly as Nicaea and Ephesus taught, and woe to him if he anathematizes the Holy Fathers. But if they err, he inquires Scripture, and he does not accept them as a rule of faith. And now here they're backtracking, He backtracks. I'll read the whole thing. No objection was made to the acts of the first and second sessions of Constantinople, but after the reading of the minutes of the third session, one of the representatives of Eutyches, the deacon and monk Constantine, remarked that an expression of Eutyches had not been correctly reproduced. So this is the expression, these two expressions. So now Constantine is like, wait, no, this has not been correctly reproduced. He had not said to those whom the synod they sent to him, if the Fathers of the Church erred in some expression, I do not blame them for this, but only inquire in Holy Scripture. Instead, however, of stating how Eutyches did then actually express himself, he only explained his own view, that the fathers have spoken diversely, and I accept all from them, but not as a rule of faith. So this doesn't really go against my argument, because I titled it Eutyches believed in Sola Scriptura, but it doesn't really matter who believed in Sola Scriptura. It's just the fact that it was rejected. So now the representative of Eutyches said that's what Eutyches said, and the representative explains himself, I guess how he thought Eutyches would have explained himself. Next one. As, however, he noticed that this expression was also very offensive. Bear in mind, also very offensive. So Eutyches' first expression was offensive, and also the second one that the representative said was offensive as well. Offensive. Why would it be offensive if it's true? He requested that it should not be used to the prejudice of Eutyches. He was answered properly that the representatives of Eutyches at their entrance had themselves given the assurance that they possessed full instructions and unrestricted authority from him, so that he would acknowledge all their explanations at his own words. And for that reason, the request was made was quite inadmissible. So they rejected his request to change the words. Embarrassed by this, Constantine requested that the words, but not as a rule of faith, might be struck out, for he had uttered them only inconsiderately, being confused by the great noise of the assembly. So Constantine now is saying, take these words out, because he noticed that they were offensive, and there would be no reason for him to request to take them out if there was not a bad reception. And he said he was just confused at the great noise of the assembly when he said it. Yeah, he was capping. But overview. Eutyches says that he accepts the fathers. He holds to the creed of Nicaea and Ephesus. Woe to him who anathematizes the father. But if the fathers erred in some sense, I don't blame them. I inquire scripture. And also, he does not accept from the fathers as rules of faith. Yeah, which is basically saying he does not accept tradition as a rule of faith. Okay. The council was disgusted at this and offended. Yeah, because they were offended. It's pretty clear. He noticed the expression was also very offensive. They were offended, and Eutyches' representative actually backtracked, and they wanted to remove the statement "not as a rule of faith," but they insisted it was kept in the record against Eutyches. Now, that's already my case done. Eutyches believed in Sola Scriptura because he said explicitly. Or his representative said explicitly, he does not accept them as a rule of faith. He does not accept tradition as a rule of faith. But he inquires only in scripture. And this was explicitly rejected at the council, because they reacted badly at his expression. If it was true, they would have reacted with happy faces, but no. For some reason, they did not like the word "not as a rule of faith." Yeah, because that is subordinating tradition to scripture in their eyes. Now I'm going to do objections, because these might be objections. Okay. He used more private interpretation, not Sola Scriptura, because he cherry-picked from the fathers. That's an objection against the idea that Eutyches held Sola Scriptura, and the council disagreed with Sola Scriptura, proving that this council and the 100 bishops at this council did not believe in the Protestant view of Sola Scriptura, which then would mean basically their congregation, each bishop's congregation who's agreeing with the bishop doesn't believe in it either, so it can keep going. But okay, the objection is he used more private judgment, not Sola Scriptura, because he cherry-picked from the fathers, which means that he's not following the principle of Sola Scriptura, but he's just using his private judgment. I think that's a silly objection. He says scripture is his only rule of faith, and he doesn't think the fathers are a rule of faith. So if he is even doing private judgment, the Sola Scriptura methodology is clearly used, because tradition is not a rule of faith, church fathers not a rule of faith, but scripture is a rule of faith. So if the fathers are wrong, we look at scripture. Okay. Next objection. Eutyches was just blatantly lying when he says, I accept all from the fathers. And he did this just to win the council's opinion. He actually did not hold to Sola Scriptura. And because he denied the fathers. And in Sola Scriptura, you actually accept the fathers insofar as they agree with scripture. I think, again, this silly argument, because Eutyches explicitly appeals to fathers, Athanasius Cyril, explicitly appeals to the Ephesian and Nicene Creed. And he also says, woe to you who anathematize the fathers. think it's pretty obvious he did not reject the fathers, because he accepts the fathers only insofar as they agree with Scripture. He accepts tradition only insofar as it agrees with Scripture. Sola Scriptura requires formal sufficiency of Scripture, which means Scripture should be able to interpret Scripture. Protestants say Scripture interprets itself. Exactly, that's Calvin's point. Yet Eutyches, when arguing against two natures, he relies on Cyril and Athanasius and says it is not found in Scripture, hence he does not hold to Sola Scriptura. This is a more intense argument, which says Sola Scriptura actually requires the belief that the Scripture interprets itself. But Eutyches actually didn't appeal to Scripture, he only appealed to the church fathers to interpret it. So if he doesn't believe there's a formal sufficiency, which means that Scripture is able to interpret itself, then he doesn't believe in Sola Scriptura, regardless of his methodology. And so I think he explicitly rejected it for the sole reason that Scripture interprets Scripture, because it's not in Scripture or the fathers. And also, I feel like even Protestants do this. They say that they reject invocation of saints, or even like Hinduism or something silly like that, or paganism, because it's not in Scripture. Well, then you're not holding to Sola Scriptura, because Scripture interprets itself. Of course you're holding to Sola Scriptura, because if it's not in Scripture, then there's no reason to hold a belief, because it's not in Scripture. It is still Sola Scriptura. He did not deny formal sufficiency of Scripture. He affirms it when he says, I only acquire in Holy Scripture, because he thinks Scriptures interpret Scripture. But also church fathers interpret Scripture, as anybody who holds Sola Scriptura believes. Objection. Yes, objection. I grant, or the objection grants that Eutyches believed in Sola Scriptura, but the council didn't accept it. Even if he does believe in it, nobody explicitly denied it. Only the representatives wanted to remove it. Nobody debated or disagreed with it. My answer, A. This is probably the best argument that you can go down. But A, the representative wanted to remove it because they thought it was too offensive. They thought it was this as well was too offensive. So the first statement from Eutyches was offensive, and the second statement from the representatives were offensive. Offensive to who if it's the truth? And bishops disagreed, treating it as a formal position. It implies they saw it as more evidence against Eutyches' orthodoxy. So the whole reason of taking down stuff that Eutyches said, like Christ was not consubstantial with us, was evidence against Eutyches' orthodoxy. And if they didn't want to remove it from the records, it would be used as more evidence against Eutyches' orthodoxy, which proves that they disagreed with it. The indicator that it was very offensive suggests they disagree. Very explicitly suggests that they disagree with it, because how would it be offensive if it's the truth? Arguments. Now I'm doing arguments for Eutyches. Even if condemnation was not for his view on the fathers and Scripture, aka because his condemnation was explicitly for his Monophysite view and not his view on Scripture, still the council still reacted badly. Even if it wasn't Eutyches that held it, even if it was his representative, still the council reacted badly. I don't care who held it. It's just the fact that the council reacted badly, which proves they disagree with it. And this was a very big council in the middle of Ephesus and Chalcedon, which housed people from both the Council of Ephesus #2 and Chalcedon, big figures like Basil of Seleucia and Flavian of Constantinople, who were very big figures in Ephesus 1. And unfortunately, Flavian died shortly after this council, but Basil was a very big figure in Chalcedon. So if he disagrees with Sola Scriptura, it is pretty, because when stuff are affirmed at councils, you can't just say one person agrees with it, because now there's like a lot of people who affirm the same belief at the council, and it is a bigger deal. Argument. Eutyches says not as a rule of faith, and this sentence was disagreed heavily, and his representatives wanted to take it back. This is very similar to the confessional statements of the Protestant churches, such as, it is not to be required of any man that it should be believed as an article of faith. Article of faith. He says, if it's not in Scripture, it's not an article of faith. That's what the Article 9 or 8 of the Anglican 39 Articles. And Eutyches says the same thing. Don't believe in tradition as a rule of faith. Only Scripture as a rule of faith. I think it's the exact same. If it's not, hey, please calm it down, because I was even thinking of objections. I couldn't think of any more. I feel like this objection is stupid, but because I couldn't think of any more. Okay, next. The council's reaction: the council did not say you are misinterpreting Cyril, or let's have a look back at the biblical verses and see if you're correct or not, because we agree with we agree with the fact that we should interpret scripture first and not the fathers. No, they literally looked at they literally argued at the Creed of Nicaea first before, like, I don't even think they argued scripture, to be honest. But okay, the fathers collectively teach this: submit to the church's language. So basically, they appealed to tradition more than they did appeal to scripture. They didn't accept his methodology and say, hey man, yeah, you're right, let's go look in scripture, bring the verses. And then also they added to the record of Eutyches, indicating that it was to be used against his orthodoxy. And they thought it was offensive, clearly demonstrating that it was a position they disagree with, or else nobody would think it is offensive. And my last and most compelling argument is, imagine if Augustine said this. Oh my days. If Augustine said this, trust me, it'd be on Gavin Ortland's videos, man. Trust me. It'd be on them videos, because that his one quote of, we accept from the fathers, which is synonymous with tradition, because the fathers are the ones who carry the tradition, but not as a rule of faith. Trust me, the Protestants will be using that. But just because it's Eutyches and a heretic and he was condemned, of course there'd be a reason to argue against it. You know, it's a bit biased. If depends on the person who says it. It, you know, the statements are the statements. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter who said them. Statements are statements. So yeah. That's my last argument. If Eutyches said something like this, you guys will be arguing that he believes in Sola Scriptura. So yeah, that's my full argument, that Eutyches, who is a heretic, believes in Sola Scriptura and was disagreed with at the council of the Home Synod of 448 AD of Constantinople. And yeah, man, that's my argument. So thank you guys so much for watching. Comment if you disagree, comment if you agree. Thank you guys for watching, and see you guys later.